it's easy to be disciplined when you're being a hard ass. It's the greats who find a way to be disciplined in all the little things too. And that's the diet, the rehab, the prehab, the sleep at night. That's the not having toxic girlfriends and, going out whoring and doing drugs and partying and, all those other things. It's the guys that can actually do A and B, the non-glorious things,
Ladies and gentlemen, super thrilled today to have James Pieratt on the podcast. James is a strength and endurance world record holder. He does jiu-jitsu, super cool, super tough guy. And he just got back from a 500-mile ultra marathon in which you were completely self-supported. Is that right? Like you didn't have any supply depots or...
No, so I mailed boxes like a lot of people do on the PCT or the AT or the CT. And then whenever I came across there was a couple campgrounds and off-season ski lodge or whatever that had pizza and chili and a snack bar, I fully indulged in those resources whenever I encountered them.
Yeah, I mean, you're only human, but I'm sure the amount of calories that you were burning a slice of pizza was just like throwing a little piece of fluff into a fire and
It was actually one of the challenges to keep up with that because you kind of people hike long distances, all the time. And, but you don't really quite understand the difference between hiking and running in terms of caloric expenditure until you do quite a bit of it. And then you're like, okay, so where 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day is plenty for hiking, I'm about doubling that on a daily basis when I'm just picking up my pace just a little bit,
Yeah. So if you were to cover 10 miles of hiking versus 10 miles of running per unit distance, is there a bigger caloric burn running it as opposed to hiking it?
Oh yeah, definitely. So it's just you wouldn't think about it too much, but if you just look at simple heart rate, if you're hiking that at a heart rate of 110 or 120, and then you're running it even at 140 or 150, you know what I mean? Something pretty responsible. I would ideally something more like 135 or so on the flats, but when you start throwing hills in there, you can't really, it's a little naive to expect to keep your heart rate that low and still maintain anything approaching a pace. But it's pretty significant. I wouldn't throw around percentages because I also imagine it varies more widely than we might suspect from individual to individual. Runner economy, efficiency, personal biology, diet, all these things. But you're burning a good amount more, when you're jogging or trail running as opposed to hiking.
Can you just take us through a typical day on the trail? What time did you wake up and how did it go from there?
So I actually am a big believer. There's a lot of people who kind of picture like a David Goggins type approach to something like this, or, or that stereotypical approach of just trying to be super savage and hardcore and your mindset and your execution and your approach to every day and its routine. But honestly, I try to make things as normal as possible. I try to keep as much to a normal routine as I would if I was at home. I wake up, 4 or 5 a.m. I get up, I do all my essentials. I meditate for 10 minutes, just very basic Vipassana, mindfulness, or I do some breath work, just some very simple breath work. I eat, I have coffee, and I start my day. So on the trail, I tried to hold to more or less that same rhythm, and then think about it, before lunch and after lunch. So think about it, when I wake up in the morning, I'll, look at my maps and scan and kind of look, take the temperature. If it's a really hot day, I might, be a little more conservative in my estimate for where I'd like to stop. But then I, find a good place to stop lunch, somewhere usually with a view, stop 30, 60 minutes, eat, digest a little bit, soak it in, and then check my maps and find a good place that I would ideally like to make camp at night, somewhere near a water source. So I'm not lugging camp water super far, and I fill my bottles. Somewhere a little bit off the beaten path. I prefer to solo camp, so I avoid campgrounds and common campsites or group campsites. I would most frequently just look for a good place that I like to camp somewhere. I would camp if I were like hunting or whatever. Avoid the widowmaker, any dead trees that might fall on me, and any ground that's sloped or any areas that are swamped by insects. And like I said, I like a good clean water source because for everything else, and there were a few nights like this and mornings, but it really sucks to run an ultra marathon every day and then go to bed thirsty and wake up and not be able to, chug a big thing of salt water and then a big cup of clean water and then have a cup of hot coffee. So it's like I was really, I really tried to always be close to a good water source when I laid my head down at night.
So how many hours a day were you running in total then? What was the morning block? What was the afternoon block?
It varied. So honestly, my intention going in was to more or less just crank out about 50 miles a day, and about
just 50 miles a day.
50 miles
no
a day.
big deal. Carrying a pack.
It was naive. It was naive. I mean, in the end, I ended up about averaging that, but my first 3 days on the trail, I failed to hit my mileage all 3 days. One of the days my lowest mileage day was 26 miles. And so my first 3 days, I spent a lot of time talking with myself and evaluating if maybe I was everything I thought I was, and if maybe I had been foolish or naive in setting this particular goal. And I arrived at the conclusion that I definitely had been, but it was a little too late to second guess any of that. So we might as well, as they say, the only way out is through. And it's also like, you're 3 days or however many X amount of days into, crossing a state, a far away from interstate, from a city, settlements, any of that. So it's like, in a way, it makes it easy to, there's no real option. You've already burned the boats, there's no real option for backing out. So it was for me, it was always a pretty simple matter of continuing to push forward.
Why do you think the mileage was lower on those first 3 days? I mean, in theory, you should be at your most conditioned and least injured at that point.
Yeah.
But sometimes the reality is that the only way to condition for something like this is to do it.
So you nailed every comment you just made is right on the head. It's I came in physically, I was feeling this, but I was also, I live and train in Sacramento, California, which is at sea level. I would have liked to adapt to the altitude because my starting point was about 6,500 feet above sea level. But it's just what I wasn't able to. There's just time and life and such as things are. I am an archery bear hunter, and I hunt a lot of times in that 6,000 to 7,000 foot range. So I thought I had a pretty good fix on how much it would affect me. But I was wrong, because running is, again, different from hiking. It's just turning that little bit up is just a different thing. And it hit me bad. The elevation was really, really rough. My pack was also too heavy. Things were, despite all the rain this year, a lot of the water sources in Southern Oregon were dried up, or at least considered, unreliable. So I brought extra water, which was a huge mistake. Not just because the elevation, which I had a pretty good idea of what to expect in terms of elevation gain, incline. What I hadn't failed to really account for is the fact that so much of it would be right in the beginning, and it would be jumping straight in, to the heavy stuff. So my pack was too heavy. And then on top of that, there's been a lot of blowdowns on the PCT, which is, I didn't do all of my mileage on the PCT, but most of it, like a 400 or so, I think.
Pacific Crest Trail.
Yeah, the Pacific Crest Trail and the Oregon portion specifically, which is my run was pretty tidily from border to border. So from the Oregon-California border in the south, north to the Oregon-Washington border. And through a lot of that area, particularly in the south, just the blowdown. So it's like, not just the constant interruptions to any little bit of momentum that you get going, but also the fact that you're literally climbing over, ducking under giant trees through a lot of the way. And with weight on your back, that's harder than just running, in a straight line. So a lot of these things I hadn't accounted for. I didn't beat myself up too much over. I'm pretty good about that in general. I kind of, what's going on here and now? What can I do about it? Sort of mindset. So essentially, I just kept going. I got a pair of trekking poles as soon as I could, because I had just been running without them. Dropped as much weight from my pack as I could, which really just came down to just eating and drinking a bunch of water and food, anything extra. And then the next hiker box I saw, I ditched, which is basically it's like a public box. If you bring too much stuff, or if you have stuff you don't need, you can leave it in a box, and anyone coming along the trail that may be in need or need supplies can check there and, potentially make use of it. So I left.
I've never heard of this before. You'd think I would have, but.
Oh yeah, it's I don't know, but I'm not sure if they're common out but in the Pacific Crest Trail, it's a pretty common sight. Yeah, it's great. It's pretty cool.
It's kind of like the library boxes on the streets in the city where I live, Vancouver, where you can leave a book, take a book, whatever you want.
Yeah, we have that too. I like that too. I'm a big reader, so I've always liked that. But yeah, so it's the same idea. And like generally when I would come to these boxes, I'd always check them, even if all my supplies were good, because you never know. It's like, in one, I realized like, oh, hey, hand warmer could be useful. And oh, hey, I have an extra pack of batteries that I am, never going to need. So I just tossed those in there. I took the hand warmers and, so it's stuff like that. The other one, I found a French naval emergency water ration in like a little 4-ounce pack. And so they had a bunch of them in there. I was like, I'll take one of those and, threw a green bar back in instead. And so it's like, honestly, I should have just kept that. I should have kept that as a souvenir. That would have been kind of a cool little thing. But yeah, so I dished as much weight as I could in hiker boxes and just eating and drinking. And I think it was the end of the third night, the end of the dark days, we'll say, where I came to a campground and had a hot cup of chili and was able to buy a bunch of candy in their little campground store. And the next morning, got a breakfast burrito on my way out. I camped kind of outside the grounds and then just grabbed a burrito on my way out. And that was a bit of a turning point for me, or at least I thought it was. Like mentally, it was a turning point for me. But after that, it was, you got a lot of, there's particularly a stretch called Mosquito Hell in Southern Oregon, which was on day 2 or 3. And it's 50 to 60 miles of just giant. I mean, it's probably like you guys have up in the north. They're just giant mosquitoes, and they're undeterred, even by DEET. Like they swarm you. They bite through clothes, mosquito nets. And just anytime you stop moving, they're all over you. So setting up camp and getting into your tent. Like I was ninja quick diving into my tent, getting my pack in, and there were still 11 of them in there with me by the time I zipped it up. And
that's because you got to start 50 feet back.
Oh, man.
You never just dive in your tent. You got to go for a run away from your tent and then come back. And you got about 4 seconds till they catch up.
Man, that was rough. But it was definitely bothersome, but it didn't quite drive me mad like it is. Like a lot of people just quit at that point, just hike. They're just like, no, I'm good, because it's a good stretch and it's bad. Like it's bad. And then from there, everything was like I said, mentally, things kind of turned around after I got out of the South. And the only real snafu I had was in Central Oregon. One of my supply boxes was late, and it was going to be like a day, or according to the courier, it was running a day late. So I kind of ended up in this situation where I had to choose between waiting there to the next day and with fingers crossed, hoping that it got delivered, or figuring something else out. And
I'm pretty sure you went on.
Yeah. So basically what I did is, it was a pretty simple fix. It was more, I kind of used the opportunity, honestly. I got a ride to my next supply box, which was like 80 miles up, and then added an extra loop to the trail further up, which technically was harder, steeper terrain and at higher elevation, but it was also an area I really wanted to see. Have you ever seen the film The Shining?
Yeah.
So it was where the area surrounding where that was filmed, the hotel where that was filmed, is in Northern Oregon. It's called Timberline Lodge area. Yes. And so there were a number of trails around there, including some with great waterfalls and, just like timberline views. And so it was pretty cool, Mount Hood area and beyond. So I did some of this like connecting trails and stuff in there to make up my mileage. And it ended up working out pretty perfectly timing wise. In total, it was like a little over 10 days, a little under 10 and a half days, somewhere in there when I finished. So, and you finished, it's called the Bridge of the Gods, the bridge connecting the Oregon and Washington border. The trail runs through, so it's kind of a cool little...
Yeah, there's a cool little clip of you running across it on your Instagram.
Yeah, there's cool. It really was cool. And it was like coming in, and the sun was just sitting right over the river. Just, I don't know. It was kind of everything I hoped it would be, but I don't know. I think maybe I didn't fully believe it until it was actually happening. Like it always seemed like some distant object.
Well, there's so many things I want to ask, and I'm going to try and get them all in. But strangely, my first question is, how were you sleeping on the trail? Because I found that doing long multi-day things, usually my sleep goes for a crap. And then the amount of sleep that you get direct is so relevant for the next day, whether you're like, this sucks, what the fuck am I doing here? Versus, oh, look at this is amazing. Oh, this isn't a, this isn't an obstacle. This is an interesting problem to be solved. And that's the difference of 3 hours of sleep, or just the quality of sleep, completely affects your outlook. It may not change what you're going to do. You're going to tough on through anyway. But whether you do it with, seeing obstacles as challenges, or obstacles as, insert very long string of 4-letter words here that,
so there's no denying the quantity, especially when I had to make up those miles. That meant sacrificing most of a night of sleep to do so. Which, I mean, in retrospect, again, I didn't have to do it. Like, this wasn't a record attempt. This wasn't competition with anything. This was essentially a funeral. My dad passed recently. I was processing that, and he never wanted a funeral, but he did always want to hunt this particular part of Oregon. And so I figured, this would be my way of processing and kind of, in my own way, showing him that, letting him see that part and letting it be his, I guess, a memorial run maybe. So I really, I don't know, maybe that was what more than anything drove me forward. I'm not sure, but I just, in terms of like not taking a day when I maybe should have taken a day, and maybe maybe not pushing through a night here or there, but I was really present. Now, I mean, I was just enjoying it. Like, at the end of the day, it sounds like this big, like 500 miles seems like a big thing, but if you break it down, for 10 days, I ran between 26 and 77 miles per day, which, I mean, that's not nothing, but my volume at home, like preparing for this, I was running 40 miles 4 times a week, 4 separate days. So it's like my volume was already relatively high, and I had full support, and the terrain and the elevation wasn't bad, but at the end of the day, the task itself is maybe not as big as it seems. And on top of that, like, at the end of the day, I'm just a kid in the woods playing ninja, essentially. Like, I enjoy running, I enjoy camping, I love the outdoors, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. So it's like, I never truly, after those first 3 days, I never really truly felt in the suck. Like, I watched my body degrade. The muscles in my lower body seem to adapt, but the joints definitely, it's just slow. You kind of slowly watch decline bit by bit, and all the little micro injuries, rolled ankles, tweaking, everything adds up, but, on the whole, like I said, I was just a big kid out in the woods having fun.
Is it okay if I ask you about your dad?
Yeah, of course. So essentially, and also understand, like, I grew up, he's a bear hunter from a long line of Appalachian bear hunters. We kind of had our way of, the way he raised us and the way we look at the world is more probably comparable to something you'd see a century or two ago in many ways, as compared to now, a very hyper pragmatic and, maybe more of a stoic outlook on things. So keeping that in mind, he was a bear hunter. He loved the mountains. He fell off a cliff and essentially just wrecked almost everything in his body. He laid there for hours,
and he fell off a cliff while hunting, or while hiking?
He was doing some. Actually, I'm not sure. He was doing some sort of scouting on a 4-wheeler, and it just slid off the edge, and he went with it. He survived that. They actually, after some hours, they got him out. They got him out with the helicopter, took him to the hospital in the city. It was like an hour and a half away, and I think like 2 days later, he checked himself out and went home. Just figured it'd be better to heal there. And as a few weeks went by, I think it became clear that he probably wasn't going to have much use of his body practically, after this. And so he, one day he just kind of sat down in his rocking chair looking out at the mountains, and he shot himself. And obviously it was rough, there's no getting around that. But in my own way, I understand. And it was in the way that his mind worked. It was like we loved our dogs, animal, all that and stuff growing up, like they were family. But if one of them was old and sick, like it was just what, my dad would take them out and he'd shoot them. And that was just how we did things. And he could kind of see that same attitude in the way that he had done and approached this. And so I understood that aspect of it. But it's still, that was in December. So it still took.
It's easy to say I sort of sympathize with that, and I do. But it's different when it happens to you. Or
It is.
yeah,
But it's also, as a man who walks through life holding a certain set of beliefs with such things, that a man essentially, it's on him to define and dictate his own fate in life at every level. You got to kind of, you can't change your beliefs or cry victim when that turns back on you. The truth, your beliefs are your beliefs. And so it doesn't stop, it doesn't make it hurt any less, but it's also, I can't blame him. I can't say I do anything different in his shoes either. It's also not for me to judge, it's for me to miss my dad, to mourn my dad and understand the man that he was and what the impact he had on making me the man I am. And to do, what I have to do to say goodbye and lay him to rest. So that's what this was, Yeah.
And you found the time on the trail useful for processing that?
Yeah. Particularly as, most of our best memories were in the mountains together, hunting bear. He was a houndsman. So we always had a lot, bear hounds, and we spent a lot of time together in the mountains. And so that connection made it easy. Yeah. And then also it's where I feel at peace, or I'm able to process. And I do very much enjoy a good conversation, but on the whole lifestyle, I am highly introverted. And so in terms of processing or dealing with things, I much prefer to do that alone and away from things. So it was very conducive for healing in that regard.
Yeah. I completely, absolutely empathize. Obviously my own experiences are different, but it's always where I've retreated to process, loss and tragedy and things like that. So it does seem to be a certain, and there's many different ways to deal with adversity, to deal with tragedy. And who are we to say that any of them are wrong? But there is certainly this one, and an extrovert would look at this and go, oh my God, you're doing it completely wrong. You should be talking about it and you should be processing it and you should join a group, and maybe that's right for them, but it's not right for everybody.
Yeah, no, I agree. And don't get me wrong, I do the counseling, and the group stuff I've never really been comfortable with, but it's like I talk to a counselor and I approach it from both sides. I'm not big on saying antidepressants or anything I'm not against them, but it just, from my particular set of circumstances, just talking about it with someone, a qualified person, and then just working hard at understanding why I'm feeling these things, and then working hard in general, because for me, one of the things that's always made me feel fulfilled is being productive. And so I noticed a direct correlation with my depression and my productivity levels, regardless of whether I was doing, the counseling, the healing, all that. So it's like, I just keep
So when you were more depressed, you were more productive?
No. So it would be an inverse relationship, I suppose. So yeah, I noticed that as I became more depressed, I would become less productive, and it would have created a negative feedback loop.
Right.
And then once I started, forcing myself to be productive, to create program work, whatever, more often, and putting more attention to that, I noticed I started to feel better too.
Okay.
While also doing all the requisite counseling and everything else.
So let's change gears a little bit, because if people were listening to this and they had missed the first 10 seconds of the introduction, they might think that you're just an ultramarathon guy. And you are an ultramarathon guy, but I guess your claim to fame would be that you're a hybrid athlete. I think you first came to public attention when you deadlifted triple your body weight, which was just over 500 pounds, and then went and ran a 50 miler that same day. I forget, were you carrying weight during that 50 miler?
No, it was just a straight 50. Okay. Yeah.
Just a straight 50.
Just a straight 50.
And that's, it's kind of like a CrossFit concept from hell. And we all know power athletes and we all know endurance guys, but this hybrid area is really interesting to me. What draws you to the hybrid thing, and what I'm going to get into the details of the hybrid training, I think, because it's something that I'm really interested in. It's my podcast, so I can go where the hell I want. But what draws you to not only being high endurance, but also high strength?
I've always just preferred a more, and this word has become more commercialized recently, but a more functional approach to things. To me, it never made logical sense that if I want, let me rewind. Growing up, I idolized like that lone martial artist on the mountain, the rugged mountain man, the Spartan, like those characters. And to me, they were always functional and never overly specialized in physical characteristics. Like a Spartan wasn't a 300-pound bodybuilder, you know what I mean? And a mountain man, wasn't, Kipchoge, and an Olympic runner who's, just going to blast out 1600s on the track like it's nothing, there has to be some balance of strength, of durability, of endurance, of athleticism, speed, all these things. So I actually started as a martial artist, still am, jiu-jitsu and pretty much everything at this point, but jiu-jitsu is where I spend most of my time these days. And so my initial lens for approaching these things was through the lens of martial arts, not through the lens of fitness or a specific discipline like powerlifting or CrossFit or something like that. And so early on for me, it was like a lot of kettlebells and body weight stuff. My initial entry to fitness, like proper fitness, had actually been when I was incarcerated as a young, so I was about 18, 19 for that one. But I had just a brief recap, some instability in my childhood, my teens and 20s were wild and spent on the wrong side of the law. And when I was, one of the multiple times I was incarcerated, I just kind of flipped a switch and started reading a lot about history and doing a lot of body weight exercise and meditating and just what they call in their programming, which is it's a term I actually like quite a bit because it's the way you conduct yourself, your system for dealing with life, your daily routine. It's the lanes that you stay in or don't stay in. So it's the program you run, as an inmate would say. And my program was just calisthenics, reading, and meditating, and trying to stay in my own little box. And so calisthenics and then eventually kettlebells and whatnot were kind of my first intro.
So you started with body weight and kettlebells.
I did, yeah. Coming at things from a more functional perspective. A martial artist being, 350-pound giant really had very, very little appeal or utility to me, but neither did being weak, helpless, and constantly injured, which, as many of us jiu-jitsu guys find out, if you're not doing some form of prehab, therapy, or, well-rounded strength training, you're going to be injured a lot. So it really started there. My early, indirectly, at least initially, my early teachers were like Pavel Tatsulin and a lot of the functional guys, mostly the strong first guys. I really liked the way that they seem very artful in finding like a minimum effective dose of something and then applying that instead of just blasting blindly, with massive volume or intensity. And I also like the historical element, how they studied a lot, or rediscovered, studied, however you want to frame it, a lot of the Soviet strength training protocols that were, quite frankly, steroids and stuff aside, far ahead of the Western, most of the Western approaches at that time, And so I was very drawn to that. But over time that evolved. I'm always, I take my white belt mentality, with me, not just through the belts in jiu-jitsu and wrestling and everything else, but I try to take it in life in general, and particularly in the area where I think, where I think I know the most, because I find that there's a pretty direct correlation between, the higher you go up the chain of expertise, the more myopic you find a lot of the people. It's not that they aren't geniuses, but if you spend your entire day looking at a pinhead through, a microscope, it's going to come to define your reality at some point.
Right.
So I like to look at alternate stuff as much as I can. And
so then what other stuff did you start doing? I mean,
so initially I actually started at the both extremes of the spectrum. So limit strength, 1 rep max, properly executed technically, but just straight strength, and then raw endurance. So ultra marathon running. And I myself just kind of jumped straight into ultras. I never ran a marathon. I didn't really build up. I wouldn't recommend that. It would have definitely been smarter, but what I know now in retrospect is that I wasn't really drawn to the running itself so much as the freedom and the exploration. I've always had a kind of romantically seen, like the wandering native or Odin, wandering through, through the realms, and, just like something about that is always just, I mean, I don't think it's unique to me. It's definitely not unique to me, but that the human spirit, like we have that explorer in us, we wouldn't have spread over the earth. We wouldn't have come over the Bering, come through Beringia and whatever other ways to, explore North America, completely unpopulated and unknown continent. But and a lot of the theories with that think that like the biggest driver was really just exploration, what's over that next hill. And, or, hey, I have like 5 sons who are all like teenagers and 20-year-olds. I got to get rid of them. I got to go send them out over the next hill to tell me what's there. But either way, I have whatever that nomad thing is. I think I have that gene in me, that bug. And so come to find out that this format of kind of the wilderness runs, the multi-day, having to employ small bits of, navigation and field craft and, your camping and your water selection and your route selection and logistics and all these things just really seems to kind of be, it's scratched the itch for me in just a very particular way that I kind of had been looking for without realizing I'd been looking for it.
Now, there's a whole giant body of scientific literature and research and sort of anecdotal knowledge about powerlifting and Olympic lifting. I mean, that's been studied to death. It's so easy to quantify. And at the same time, endurance sports, whether it's 10K, a marathon, ultramarathon, that's also been studied fairly well. I mean, I remember reading a book by Tim Noakes that was literally about 4 or 5 inches thick just on the research of endurance. But this doing both at once that isn't nearly as well studied. I mean, I read a couple of papers about it, talking about, in this case, they were arguing for the separation of strength and endurance training. Don't do them too close together. But really, it'd be way harder to optimize for those two, and it'd be way harder to study those two at the same time. So how do you reach?
It's an interesting frontier. I mean, and it is still somewhat of a frontier. Like you said, there's not a lot of established data or curriculum. And so what I've come to realize is like the interference effect, as they call it, is very real. And that would be like if you're a high-level powerlifter and you start running 10 miles every single day, it's going to affect your powerlifting because your body is going to be adapting to another stimuli in an opposing direction. By same thing, if you're a ultramarathon runner and all of a sudden, instead of your usual volume, you're just doing deadlift singles, like it's not, you know what I mean? Your body's going to start adapting towards that. What we see specifically is that the human body actually prioritizes cardio adaptations or adaptations to our endurance over strength. It's interesting because we are literally, the human body's built as a crane. I mean, if you think about it, if you break it down, mechanically speaking, we're a crane. We have these long arms with these, hands with opposable thumbs meant to attach to physical objects, manipulate them, lift them, hinge, squat, move with them. Having said that, we are beyond even that. We're endurance creatures. I'm sure you are familiar with the, persistence hunting, that technique. And there's some debate on, to what degree it affected human evolution. But it's been observed, for the last 200 years. For sure.
Yeah. There's non-debatable examples of it. I mean, in Africa, there's tons of examples of people running down an antelope. In the North American literature, when Samuel Hearne traveled from Churchill to the mouth of the copper mine, at one point they chased down a caribou, and I forget how long it took. I want to say 24 hours of chasing the damn thing in the snow, keeping it moving, and eventually it dropped dead from exhaustion. I can't imagine that meat tasted very good, but it probably tasted better than no meat at all.
Yeah, I imagine so at the time, but no, I wouldn't imagine it would taste very good. But you also see it be more effective in more extreme climates. So the Arctic, there was actually, you might be aware, but during World War II, there was a Russian family that basically fled the conflict. They didn't want to be involved. Their religious beliefs, I believe, precluded that. And they fled to Siberia and lived there for something like 50 years in isolation. And when they were rediscovered, they were like, one of the sons was just literally like running down, like, ungulates,
Really? Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd heard about that family. I didn't know that they were Did they run out of bows and arrows, traps, and ammunition?
I guess so. After 50 years, you know what I mean? But I imagine, you'd have to develop some form of fluency with archery or slings. I would assume, like, it just wouldn't be practical otherwise. But yeah, apparently they're like the oldest son or one of the sons was just running. It was extremely taxing. It's not very efficient in terms of, the caloric balance of expenditure to, acquisition. But it just kind of shows you what we're capable of. And it's just biology. We're bipedal things. We aren't covered in hair. We have sweat glands. We have, large lungs. We're very efficient at moving. It takes less energy to move 2 legs than it does 4 legs. And we can think. So we can guide an antelope away from water holes into open ground where it's easier to track, all these things. We can modulate our pace. So we're just running just fast enough to, kind of stay with it, keep it in range. And then when it starts to slow down and rest, we pick it up, So it's like we have all these things working in our favor. But my point being that the human body seems to release, there's a protein called mTOR, which is hypertrophy, the muscle building, just to oversimplify things, the muscle building protein, the signaler for your body. There is also another one called AMPK, which is the endurance, the endurance signal, we'll say. And that, it basically signals your body to start adapting to endurance stimuli. What they see is that AMPK, basically the endurance signaler overrides the muscle building signaler. So if you do a crazy bodybuilding workout and then go run a marathon right after, the mTOR is going to get washed out by the AMPK. Having said that, they observed that there's very different, you're dealing with different time frames. I don't believe half-life is the correct terminology, definitely not the correct terminology, but if you think like their presence of blood saturation. AMPK tends to only last for, 3, 4, 6 hours, somewhere in there. So if you were to say, go for a good, nice run in the morning, you do your 10 miles in the morning, you get back, you wait at least 3 to 4 hours. Also, they've seen that ingesting carbohydrates, particularly a complete meal in that time frame, also helps kind of balance things back out. And then you were to do your strength training, say later in the day, in the afternoon or the evening, you would be maximizing just those natural responses to your body. The mTOR stays in your system much longer, more like 18 to 20 hours or somewhere in that range. So, it's if you were to do that in the morning and then run 5, 6 hours later, you're going to run into more of an interference effect than doing it vice versa.
That's so interesting. I didn't know the biochemistry behind it, but if I recall correctly, they showed that the studies that I had read and the meta-analyses were saying that endurance training negatively affects strength training, but the other way around, it wasn't as clear a result.
I think what you're dealing with,
which is entirely congruent with what you were just talking about there with signaling.
And of course, dosage will matter and all these things. And there's also some bias in the fact that most endurance athletes don't do enough strength training. So by introducing a little bit, you're going to see positive correlation and other outputs. But there's also the same thing. Like endurance training is very similar to jiu-jitsu in the sense that, and I use this is a little bit of a clickbait term, but doing strength training makes you technically better at jiu-jitsu and technically better at ultra running. And that's because it keeps you on the mat more, or on the track more, and not injured on the sidelines where you can actually be learning and listening and absorbing new techniques. But I like to use that term and say, hey, doing strength training will make you better at jiu-jitsu. And then people get, there's the inevitable response, like, what? No, you can't just smash people. And it's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying keep your shoulders, your hips, your knees, and, your pieces together, and you're going to be able to go to more classes, learn more jiu-jitsu, and interact with and enjoy the sport more. And the same goes for running.
Yeah. 100% in agreement, especially as you get older. If you're 20 years old, you can get away with eating like crap and not doing any strength training, and just the miracle of growth hormone and testosterone will probably carry you through.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So in terms of trade-offs between the two, obviously do them real close together, they're going to interfere with each other. There's also the issue of body weight. I'm assuming that if you were 100% dedicated to ultra running, that you would try to cut down your body weight. You would still probably do some weight training to keep your bits together. But what's your body weight now? What do you think it would be if your sole focus was, ultra running? And what do you think your body, well, obviously if you were powerlifting, your optimal body weight would be basically as heavy as possible.
Yeah. So essentially, right now I usually sit between 180 and 190. It could vary, but you're probably looking at a practical range of like 181 to 187 at 5'11", and it's like a real 5'11", not a UFC 5'11", you know?
Not an online dating profile 5'11", or...
No, that one says 6'4".
Yeah, of course.
But I have competed as lightweight in IBJJF, you know, so I'm walking around in mid to high 160s and shedding those last few pounds right before. But it's not a healthy weight for me. And then I've also been at the point where I was really prioritizing running a lot, but still kind of doing the minimum effective dosage of weight training. And that seems to be that 178 to 181 range. And then I've been almost as heavy as 200 pounds when I was just eating, lifting, and doing like some rucking or running here and there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I also did an intentional bulk for about 12 months that ended about 12 months ago, 8 or 10 months ago. And that was just slow, deliberate, trying to put on quality mass, trying to get my joints and organs and everything to kind of get used to being 190 something, and then just kind of lean out again and get back to my normal weight. But I don't do much intentional body composition alteration. I find, nature kind of takes care of most of that for you, you know. But I always have, my only rules, I always have strength training. I always have low intensity, mid intensity, and high intensity cardio. The dosages will vary, and also I'm realistic with life and, you know, all that, and not everything's going to be perfect. And I run a business and am a pro athlete full time. So sometimes things are just going to be what they are, you know.
For sure. In terms of your cardio, in terms of your running, is it all running? Do you spend time on rowing machines or Stairmasters?
Oh yeah. So I do just literally. Today I was on an assault bike doing fartleks, which is for anyone unfamiliar, he was a Swedish scientist who studied track athletes, you know, a few decades back, and it's basically just varying tempos. So today, given the fact that my nervous system's still pretty drained and I'm just still kind of dealing with some of the lethargy and after effects, I just kept it simple. I just did 5 minutes of varying tempos, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. I did 1 minute on, 30 seconds on, 1 minute off, you know, and when I say off, it's 50% cruising. And when I'm on, it's 80%, you know, and it's all relative intensity to the day. I'm not real big on using like 1 rep maxes or anything like that. Me and all of my athletes use just what I call intensity, an intensity guide, or a rate of perceived exertion, as many people call it. Because there's going to be days when you get in there on a bike or on the deadlift bar or whatever, and you're, 300 pounds feels incredibly heavy because you're just getting over the cold. You didn't sleep that great last night. You had an argument with your girlfriend the day before, whatever it is, you know, it's all emptying from the same cup. And then there's another day where you sleep 9 hours, you know, you get up with a giant hard on, you take one look at the bar and 600 pounds flies off the ground, and you know what I mean? And so 80% on those days is going to be very different, you know, and I apply that the same to myself.
Yeah, there's the idea of quantifying like a sort of a perceived exertion. Yeah, I'm lifting the same weight as I did yesterday, but it seems much easier than it does yesterday. But there's also a movement to quantify it more objectively. Things like, I know the Kabuki strength guys out of Portland. Stephan, who's an insane person.
He's amazing.
He's amazing.
Great guy.
I say insanity with all due respect, and I really mean it. But I think they track like bar speed. So when you're doing your squat, say, they track the speed of the bar. So if you're doing your 7 rep warm up, and the bar is moving faster than it normally does, that means that neurologically you're in good shape, physiologically you're in good shape, and they might up whatever the number is that they're going through. They were going for a 700-pound squat. Now they're going to go for 720. So they're using quantification and measurement. And similarly, I think some track athletes are using the length of time that the foot is on the ground. Yeah. There's various ways to track that. Have you played with either of those?
We like to use the bottoms-up kettlebell press and grip strength. There are like actually they're pretty accessible, I believe, but little just like things that measure grip strength output that make that very easy. And in a situation, I might assign an athlete to go pick up one of those and use that. But generally, we just do things like bottoms up kettlebell press on both arms. And generally, for whatever reason, that seems to I think it's just the neurological demand, the balance, all that. And then the grip strength. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But grip strength, keep it brief, grip strength. Your grip strength will be a very, very direct reflector of your current neurological recovery state.
Does that include both for strength and endurance training?
Yeah, that's going to be your CNS's overall output. So it's like, yeah, I wouldn't go if my grip, my grip feels super weak, or I'm doing, a kettlebell hold, bottoms up hold and press, and I'm doing 7 and I'm experiencing fatigue when 10 is my normal warm up. I'm definitely not going to be going for a long run that day, or at least I'm going to be highly moderating that intensity. Or maybe I pull that run back to a ruck, or
So you were saying you finished your run a week ago, but you're still neurologically and physiologically drained at this point.
It has been more than a week now, week 9-10 days. So that is one aspect I definitely underestimated. I pretty well expected what my body was going to go through in terms of my muscles and my joints. And honestly, I was mostly just extrapolating my experience with 150 mile. I think 160 was about my furthest single effort before this. So I kind of just scaled that up, to 500, and that seemed to work pretty well with what to expect on my joints and my body. And again, I had some relief in that by the variety of the terrain, and as annoying as it was and exhausting to duck and dive under all those trees, it also broke up the movement patterns, and as opposed to me just kicking earth in a straight line on cement for, or whatever. So, but I'm sorry, what was your original question?
It seems like you've really been heavily drained by this experience.
Yes, right. And perfect example there. Some mental fog, energy is low. My exercise output, I did a very modest calisthenic workout about 5 days after I got back, and was really sore. I did a heavy bodybuilding routine the next day. So I did underestimate some of the neurological effects for sure, and nothing lasting, but it's I normally sleep, say 7 hours on a really good night, and it's been more sleep 8 or 9 hours and then take a 2 or 3 hour nap and still kind of feel fatigued and a little foggy. But it's lessening with each day, and just quality food, quality sleep. And I'm a big fan of active recovery, so little 5-minute sessions on the bike, some push-ups, and maybe an overhead kettlebell carry forwards and backwards at a moderate weight, and then I'm out. And
just remind your body that it's still going to have to do some work in the future and get the blood moving.
Yeah, and so it's a little bit of poison can be the best antidote if employed correctly. But I've always been a fan of active recovery in general, and nothing a lot of people will take it too far, use it as an excuse to just work out. And I think you have to be very precise, but to get blood and oxygen and nutrient, get everything flowing and running through those tissues that need recovery, it's generally I tend to prefer that to any real high tech, stem cell injected cryo Wolverine Captain America therapies.
Well, if it comes with adamantium claws, I'm in, but otherwise,
man, yeah, that changes the debate a bit.
I remember reading, I forgot what the actual statistics were, but people who completed a marathon versus people who trained for a marathon, but then for some reason didn't do the actual marathon, were at tremendously higher risk of coming down with an upper respiratory infection, a cold, or the flu. And it was just a good illustration of how digging fairly deep, a marathon, so somewhere between 2 and 6 hours, 2 and whenever the race closes, hours of suffering, really does depress the immune system. And
definitely. They've seen, and I mean, obviously that scales up with ultra runners, but I think it's for every race event over 70 miles or 100 miles, this is very vague, it's been a while, but I believe 2 out of every 3 competitors come down with some form of respiratory infection within 2 weeks of the completion.
So maybe you're fighting something off right now.
It could be, honestly. I was kind of expecting it, so I came back and I was blasting micronutrients, and you know what I mean, and both in food form and like animal pack vitamin packs, and was just kind of waiting for it. But I'm sure there is something there, because I'm obviously compromised in terms of just my system is obviously compromised in its ability to deal with anything like that. So it could be something in the background, most likely. Yeah.
With all the weight, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but I'm going to ask it. With all the weight training and all the running and all the rucking, how are your joints doing? How are your hips, knees, and ankles doing?
They're excellent. All that stuff is excellent for my joints. If I get a little bit lazy with the strength training, or even just dial back the intensity enough, that situation changes pretty rapidly.
Really?
Yeah. Running and grappling are both hard on the joints. Running on the street is particularly hard on the lower back and knees, just in general. And then it's not bad. I cannot say you can adapt to it and progress it intelligently and have that be your thing. But at the higher volumes like I run, and also just for preference, I find I can do a lot more on trails. It's harder in the beginning because your muscles have to adapt to deal with the hills, and your ankles have to adapt with all the instability, your knees. But if you get into it, progress that intelligently, I find the variety in terrain, angles, all that really, really, really is better for longevity in the human body. And then, if you're going to push your body to that degree, there's no getting around. You got to strength train in some degree. It doesn't have to be super heavy, but you need at least, your 4 movement patterns, your push, pull, your hinge, and your squat. You got to be lifting heavy barbells. Could be kettlebell, could even be bags, could be calisthenics. But you have to do something, because those muscles need to stay active. They need to stay engaged. They need to stay challenged, at least experiencing some very small form of progressive overload, especially as we age and get older. I'm 36 next month, so I'm, I'm definitely not 22, but I'm also, I'm not 60. And I spend a lot of attention in training in a way that's going to have me doing this still at 60.
So how does weight training protect, say, the cartilage in the knee?
So I'm not going to go so far as to claim that you're going to be regenerating lost tissues doing this or doing that. It's also above my pay grade, not really my thing. Mm-hmm. But what I can tell you is that if intelligently deployed with specific hypertrophy, goals and targets, and with it operating within that range, you can take a lot of burden off that joint by strengthening the muscles that surround and support it. So essentially, that's actually like the explosion over the last couple of years of the knee over toe guy and all that stuff he does. Essentially, that's the idea behind it, is to, his big thing is helping the knee by building up the BMO, or that beautiful teardrop muscle in your quad, the athlete's muscle, the sprinter's muscle that everyone talks about, that doesn't really get stimulated by modern, not just modern life, but most modern fitness trends. And so he introduced people moving beyond the natural range, of joint movement, which is something that a lot of people believed for a long time was wrong, even though it's literally the basis of almost all standard Western medical physical therapy practice, whether it's external rotation of the shoulder or, full flexion of the knee joint or whatever. So by spending time developing a very detailed curriculum on how to build the muscles surrounding the knee, whether it's the quad or the tibialis muscle on the front of the shin beneath, with a particular emphasis on the muscles that are most commonly neglected by modern life and or fitness trends. He literally, changed the entire game for basic knee health in, most gyms around the world, or country at least.
Do you follow that protocol?
Not particularly. So I didn't really have to make much of a transition, because one of the early guys I studied under was Charles Poliquin. Okay. And that is where most of this curriculum was originally developed. Okay. And then Charles was, he coached, athletes to Olympic gold in, I think, 27 different disciplines in sports. So it's like he was, full spectrum, everything. Whereas I believe the knee over toe movement kind of focused on some of the specific details and really fleshing them out. Perhaps not too different from, say, the way BJ, the Gracies focused on, Nawaza as opposed to judo as a whole, and really specialized and developed that particular branch of it.
Sure. So you've talked a lot about prehab and rehab, and
yeah.
So what does that look like specifically for you? Like, not right now because you're recovering, but in an average week, what are some of the things that you're doing to prehabilitate yourself?
So with myself and with my athletes, I'm very sneaky. I like to be very sneaky. So warm-ups and cool-downs are usually undercover prehab exercises in some form or another. Also, it's two birds with one stone. You need to warm up, you need to cool down, and to do those, you need to move. Essentially, the goal with any warm-up and cool down is to raise your core temperature and introduce blood to the shoulder and hip capsules. If you can do that, everything else is going to more or less happen on its own. So a good way to do that is prehabilitation movements aimed at shoulder and hip capsules, more of a shoulder focus on an upper body day, hip on a lower body day, and then working down from there. You still, elbows, knees, whatnot like that. And it also just helps psychologically prime you for what's to come and, scale things down after the fact. But I like to sneak those in as warm-ups and cool down, especially because you're not doing any crazy load with them. You're not, you know what I mean? It's a technical movement, and it's going to do the job of getting the blood flowing, getting your core temp up and your lungs open.
Can you give some examples of what you would
Sure.
use as a warm-up movement then that is a sneaky prehab movement?
Sure. So let's say for like a lower body day, start out with some like basic standing hip abductions. Just you're standing there, you're lifting your leg out to the side. Once you're comfortable doing that, I would progress you to something called a shiko, which is an ancient sumo strength training. It actually predates sumo as we know it, but from Japan. And that is essentially, if you picture like this kind of the stereotypical sumo and they give the grunt, the squat, and then lift one leg, it's essentially like that. You drop down with a good relatively wide stance, drop down into a squat, and then do a lift one leg to the side. And once you can lift it up, at least a parallel, and you have some proficiency there, I'll have you start holding it for 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, to do, say, 10 reps of, 2 to 3 second hold with each side, 2 sets of those. And then have you go into some walking, with light dumbbell or light to moderate weight dumbbells, some walking RDLs or Romanian deadlifts, so it's that stiff leg, getting that single leg RDLs. So getting that, that work, that hip hinge and that separation in a unilateral fashion. And from there, most likely some version of like toe board squats or sissy squats. Essentially the rear heels are elevated. You're squatting through the knees, unweighted or light, or perhaps a kettlebell and a goblet hold to engage the core a bit more. And then from there, it's just a little bit, almost like quasi BJJ warm-ups, some bear crawls, forward, backwards, and side to side. I do almost everything in all 4 directions. All weighted carries, go forwards and backwards. I find stuff like that to be just hugely valuable in terms, whether you're a BJJ guy that doesn't want to be taken down easily, or you're a soccer, grandma who doesn't want to slip and, hurt her hip. It's just, I think, where the human body is designed to generate force generally in one direction. So we get focused on that and forget that we're supposed to move in 4 or more, So, something vaguely like that. And then if it's like, depending on the nature of the workout, we might do some like Maasai hops, I call them, which are essentially like a genuine plyometric hop. It's just a little like essentially hopping up and off the ground, off the balls of your feet. You don't let your heels touch the ground. And then as you warm up, you add a little more spring. And then you essentially peak by trying to minimize your contact time with the ground and just pop, 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 pop. And really good for the lower body joints and tendons, as well as just generally dealing with the learning proprioception, learning how to move your body and parts in relation to one another and all that.
I imagine if you did that type of routine fairly often, your odds of something catastrophic like a torn Achilles would go way down.
Yes, sir.
It's astounding how many torn Achilles have happened in my own little social circle in the past couple of years. And these things are all stochastic, and it's, you see 2 or 3 things happen and now it's a pattern. I get it. But it is a fairly common injury, and it would have been a fairly devastating injury.
It's terrible.
50 years ago, 100 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it seems like the ROI on adding just a few extra little things into your daily warm up is pretty good on avoiding some or minimize, even if it's a 50% reduction, even though I bet you it's greater, it would be very worth, And so again, I'm a big advocate of rehab, but it's honestly, what I see, what maybe separates me from some of the people whose outputs aren't at the same level, or what I see in the people to actually take me out of it. When I see in the greats, the Michael Jordans and the insert, Wayne Gretzky's and whatnot, is that these guys it's easy to be disciplined when you're being a hard ass, but it's only the greats, or it's the greats who find a way to be disciplined in all the little things too. And that's the diet, the rehab, the prehab, the sleep at night. That's the not having toxic girlfriends and, going out whoring and doing drugs and partying and, all those other things. It's the guys that can actually do A and B, the non-glorious things, Yeah,
it's easy to get under the bar and give a 1 rep max. That's
you're getting a massive, you're getting a massive dopamine hit in return. You're feeling good. You know what I mean? You're in your element, most likely in your comfort zone at that point. And so, it's very easy to pound your chest and move some weight but having the discipline to slow it down, do the cool down at the end, get home, get a good meal, do the actual recovery exercises, the mobility, and get in bed at a decent hour, all those things. That's like, at the end of the day, those are the things that separate, the good from the great. Because there's tons of genetically gifted people who are 20-something years old that can get away with, look at jiu-jitsu. There's guys that, I've seen some of the most atrocious diets ever and my fellow competitors. And, but it's, he's a 22-year-old kid that just got here from Brazil, and it's like, doesn't really matter. But the thing, once you get to the high enough level, it matters.
Yeah. I recently got into a reasonably friendly debate online. So that's a first.
Yeah.
And it was about the life expectancy effects of exercise. And it was kind of this, you only have a certain number of heartbeats in your life kind of argument. So then I went down the rabbit hole to see what the science says and what, because there's tons of data with elite level athletes. And it looks like the different studies say different things, but a common theme is that people who are just strength athletes, just power athletes, they don't tend to live any longer than a regular person. With endurance training, it seems like there is a pretty good effect that it does increase longevity up to a certain point, at which point you don't start dying earlier, but you don't get any more benefits. You get about an hour a day of cardio will extend your lifespan a certain amount, but 2 hours a day isn't going to give you twice that amount. Is that congruent with what you've read?
Yeah.
So I just started dipping into the science a little bit, and I didn't really do a deep dive and look at the studies within the meta-analyses.
I'm certainly no scientist, but I've seen some good data, particularly a study out of Japan that seemed to have some really good integrity and control to it. I believe, for anyone interested, it was MoMA, MoMMA et al. If you just did a exercise longevity and connect to that, you would probably find the study. Yes, I believe so. But in any case, if I remember correctly, it showed that strength training generally would increase your lifespan by about 1 to 2 years, but so would pretty much any other form of exercise, whether it was playing tennis or doing this or that. Now, that's not addressing quality of life, walking around hunched over with back pain, this or that, but in terms of just pure longevity, But it showed that endurance training on average, and I believe they were looking at actual endurance athletes, though maybe not super high level, but generally tend to live about 7 to 8 years longer. Yeah. And then what they showed beyond that was that combining the two was just amazing, and you might get another year or two, I believe, out of that. But that's also increasing the quality of those years as well. They also showed that it did not take very much. I believe for strength training, it was something like 20 to 30 minutes, like 3 times a week, or so. I think it was 20 minutes 3 times a week. And for endurance, it was, I believe you were right with an hour. It wasn't daily, but it was 3. I can't remember the numbers, but it was a few times, like 1 hour sessions 3 times a week. And essentially, I believe 1 hour was kind of the sweet spot. It didn't have to be super high intensity or any specific methodology. It was just about 1 hour in that good aerobic zone. Seemed to really have a big impact. And I know that from strength training and, Separate study I've also seen showed that high intensity cardio in micro doses also was very good for not just longevity, but for neuroprotective benefits, because resistance training and high intensity cardio release brain-derived neurotropic factor, which, is it's pretty fashionable right now, a lot of the biohacking circles, but essentially it's a neuroprotective, protein hormone, whatever, however it's classified, that is really only released in larger amounts. And they've compared it against baseline controls, fasting, people are doing 24-hour fasts and other forms of exercise, including lower intensity. And so just a very small, and this could be, it's all relative to the individual, but 5 seconds, 3 to 5 second sprints on a bike with a minute of just very, very light cruising in between, something like that is more than likely more than enough. And that's one reason also I try to access all three cardio zones, low, mid, and high intensity, and do my strength training. And I get blood work done. I don't do TRT or HGH or steroids or anything. I think that's a choice everyone has to make for themselves. But I just, at present, it's not required. My testosterone, all my stuff's, on the high side of natural. And so I kind of try to protect the holistic, the holistic package as much as I can with any of that, and live as long as I can and as much of a high quality life as I can.
Yeah. I think the distinction between lifespan and health span that's become fashionable.
Yeah. I like
is
that.
A good distinction.
Yeah. I've never actually heard that terminology, but I like that a lot.
Yeah. It's pretty common. Rhonda Patrick, who's...
I like that.
Yeah, she's, I think she helped popularize that. And of course the idea is, if you're persisting in a care home for the last 5 years of your life, being wheeled around and having your ass wiped, that's, you're not healthy at that point. So there might be interventions that increase your longevity, but don't increase the number of healthy years. Whereas I think if we thought about it for 5 seconds, most people would rather the bump in healthy life.
Actually, semi-related, but that reminds me, I'm reading a book right now called The Dull Knives of Pine Ridge, and it's a story about a Sioux and Cheyenne family that kind of follows 4 generations of them from the last free Sioux, and then through the reservation era into the modern era. And one of the main narrators in the book, he's in his 90s at this point, but he back when the book was written decades ago. But it was funny because it showed him, they interviewed him, they're following him in his retirement home. And I believe he was 94 years old. And his health and vitality, despite all the, going through long periods of starvation and hardship in his life, he was way healthier, more active, and more cognizant than any of the other people in his retirement home. And full appetite,
Watch out, ladies.
I know.
The male-to-female ratio has finally swung the right way.
Yep. But exactly. But a great book, by the way. Heartbreaking, but just a great book. But anyway, so it really does show it, like, if you stay active, you stay grind, your body, don't use it, you lose it. Mm-hmm. And a man had lived a hard life, but he was still there at 94.
So where do people get more of you and your stuff? I mean, you've got an Instagram account. That's how I first found out about you.
Yeah.
But you're selling programs, and you're, getting YouTube channel and whatnot. So, and it sounds like you do coaching, which I didn't know.
So the coaching thing was new and kind of accidental. Essentially, there was, we were supposed to be launching an app, and I ended up not being satisfied with what the developer put forth, and they weren't really willing to kind of meet me in the middle. And so I had been for like months talking about, the new coaching app and all this stuff, and then it fell through, and I didn't have the heart to be like, all right, guys, sorry. I had, a decent number of people set up at that point, and they had factored the coaching into personal goals like marathons or competitions they'd wanted to do and stuff. So I do work with a number of people, but I like to keep an informal personal relationship with, anyone I work with. So I try to, make sure we're both aligned in our approaches and, methodologies and goals, and not in terms of like fitness, but just that we're we're on the same page, and anyone I find that's kind of like that, feels like a good fit, I'm happy to, work with in any capacity for anywhere I can. But so find me. Instagram is where I kind of started. Just, it was free advertising, and I was working construction at the time, and seemed like a good time to start a little side hustle. And then eventually it turned into this. But we just started on YouTube. We've had I opened up a YouTube page like a year ago. We just started consistently putting out high quality content, including a 3-part little docu-series that follows the lead up, training, and actual event itself for my 500-mile trail run. The 3rd episode, I think, is coming out in like 2 weeks, and that'll be the trail run itself. I filmed as much of it as I could. And so, anyone who wants to see some beautiful scenery, my ugly mug and some blistery feet, that would be a good place. But and then so the other final thing is my training programs. It's kind of the one thing I do differently than most people online in that the fitness space or the functional strength space, and that is I like to just kind of operate with full transparency. And so most of my program, like I just released one called Appalachia. It's just exactly the playbook I used to get ready for my 500-mile run. So it's like I originally had no intention of selling programs online or doing anything, but it was one of the early challenges I did, and people, just started asking like how to train for it. And then I ended up answering so many questions and talking about it in so many DMs. I was like, all right, guys, I'm just going to put the program out for a modest price for anyone who wants to see it and train with it. So I put out the blueprint, the actual map to all the stuff I do can be found in my programs. I don't hide my secret dark art techniques and black magics and whatnot. It's also very, these things are very simple progressions if anyone is willing to follow them. And so anyway, all of that's available on my website. We also, for anyone who isn't sure, is curious, or has financial burdens, we also operate a free training website, no strings attached. Training library on our website. So we have free training programs. There's a guided running video that for anyone who just wants to really get into running. Have it's like guided meditation, just a 10-minute little basic walkthrough, and as well as a nutrition plan.
Okay. So your Instagram handle would be?
Wild Hunt Conditioning. On
your
everything.
YouTube channel would be?
Yeah. Wild Hunt Conditioning.
And your website is?
Just type Wild Hunt Conditioning, and it's on wildhuntconditioning.shopify, or just Google it.
Yeah.
But we're pretty much Wild Hunt Conditioning on everything. And Threads too. I just saw you're on Threads, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I need to. I've never been on Twitter or any of that before, so I got to figure Threads out. But I just created a Threads thing.
Yeah, I think Threads will get considerably better as they did a ready, fire, aim kind of approach there. I think it'll get a lot better as it goes along. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Good luck with your training. I'm sure people are already asking you, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And you probably have thought about...
Yeah, so it might seem anticlimactic, but I'm doing another 100-mile wilderness run in a couple weeks. As soon as I can recover. I know it. Like, I wasn't joking. Like, the bug bit me bad when I was out there. I was just like, this is right. It's just right. Just felt right, And so, as soon as my body is healed up for 100 miles, I'm going to go Southern Oregon PCT, 2 days, 100 miles, boom, boom, and quick in and out. And it doesn't seem nearly so daunting now.
No, you've moved the Overton window of endurance reasonableness. Yeah,
I suppose so, but still, I'm looking forward to it. So I plan on doing many more of these, and if anyone else is crazy enough to want to try it, I'm always here if they want to reach out for advice or gear tips or any of that, because man, I'm having a blast.
Fantastic. Best of luck.
All right, thanks, Steph.